Ha! Hello, friends and pals. Welcome out to our virtual event this evening or this afternoon with the very talented writer, Lynne Stein, an artist. Welcome, Lynn. Thanks for being with us.
Sounds not. Probably can you change the pic?
Hi, sorry. Are you there, Lynn?
Yes, the sound kind of went, and
now it's back.
That's better. All right.
Um, this is Lynn, everybody. Lynn, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Where are you?
I'm in Manchester in the UK, well, just south of Manchester. And yes, so here it's 9 o'clock at night.
10 to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Go on our side.
Yes.
Well, we're thrilled that you're here.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. I'm just going to go through a couple of housekeeping things before we begin, and before I turn the time over to Lynn. First, we're going back to in-store events starting tomorrow. We're having a big party, and by big party, I don't really mean big party, but we are having a celebration. We are having a what we call a Books and Cooks culinary competition, and we're having a cake off tomorrow. If you'd like to bring a cake in to compete, please bring it in by noon tomorrow, and you know, we'll have some cake all afternoon. And then at 4 o'clock, we will have our literary trivia contest from 4 to 5, and the cake bake off is from 12:30 until 3, but show up a little bit early if you have a cake. And on Wednesday coming, we've got Val Holly in the store. Val wrote, for those of you who are local, Val wrote the 25th Street Confidential about Ogden and its sort of body past. And this one is called Frank J. Cannon, Saint, Senator, Scoundrel. I bet there's some scandalous things happening in that one too. That's Wednesday, August 4th at 7 p.m. That'll be streamed on our YouTube channel as we are right now. So we've also reinstated our breakfast club. We had every Tuesday morning, a gathering of literary minds in the coffee shop across the way from the store. And that, like many things, went by the wayside, but it's back. And so starting this Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. at the coffee shop across the way, Mi Amore. And it's just a place to come, hang out, have a coffee, talk about books or talk about the Kardashians. It doesn't really matter, whatever is on your mind. And then I want to mention this. I think it's important. Many of our upcoming events are going to be in person. I still have a few virtual ones lined up, but we're trying to book more in-person events. I want to let all of you know that each one of these events will be properly socially distanced. Masks are highly encouraged, and the staff will be wearing masks. So I want to let you know, if you come into the store to watch any of these events, you will be in a safe place. And we are going to continue to do whatever we can to make you feel comfortable when you come in the doors of the bookstore, because you know, your friends, your family, and we want to take care of you just like you want to take care of us. So we will do everything we can to keep things safe. And if it gets to a point that we think that it's just not worth it, we will go back to virtual for a while, and then, you know, come back in a bit. So anyway, I want to let you know that. Let's move on to our guest. Lynne Stein is a textile artist. She is based in the UK. She's taught classes, educational community workshops, I guess is maybe a better term, through museums and galleries and in the community and healthcare organizations. She's exhibited her work for over 30 years in different venues throughout the world. And she is the recipient of support from Arts Council England, which I don't know much about. So maybe you could spend 1 minute telling us about it, because I know you have a lot to say. She's got an ongoing interfaith community project within a dental clinic in Jerusalem, which sounds pretty fascinating to me. And she's been featured on BBC radio and television, and has also authored Rag Rug Creations, an exploration of color and surface. Her book today is Shedding the Shackles, Women's Empowerment Through Craft. And she's going to be showing and telling some things. She's going to be some things. She's going to be talking about some things. And I look forward to all of it. I'm going to here in a moment turn the time over to Lynne, but I would like to let you know, if you have a question for Lynne, please type it up in the chat. Also, let us know where you are, and I will moderate those questions after Lynne is finished speaking. So without further ado, Lynne, thank you again for being here. I turn the time over to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me again, and thank you everybody for listening. So what you can see here, it's a shame that you can't see my entire studio, but you're seeing an element of it. So you can see I'm surrounded by very crammed full bookshelves, and this room, my studio, is really where I do most of my making. And basically, I am a textile artist, and as Lane said, I've worked for over 30 years doing residencies, commissions, workshops, which have also involved a lot of work with involving and teaching and having work alongside me, people of all ages and backgrounds. And because my work is mainly textiles, and Shedding the Shackles is really not solely, but it has a lot of textile projects in it, certainly. I thought I would sort of start off by doing a brief reading from the book, just sort of putting some textile stuff in context, really. And then I will show you a few examples of my own work and the kind of tools of my trade, and then turn it over to more of Shedding the Shackles, really, and read you some extracts again from that to give you more of a flavor of the book's contents. So to start with, in the first part of the 20th century, suffering from a legacy inherited from the Victorian era, craft skills such as weaving, sewing, embroidery, and quilting were regarded largely as women's domestic pastimes and remained undervalued and marginalised. Still associated with a class of stay-at-home women with leisure time on their hands, it took several decades for attitudes to change, for the boundaries between fine art and craft to blur, and for textile crafts to be given the same respect and recognition as other fine art media. In the past, it would be true to say that women's cultural contributions had been largely sidelined and overlooked. However, today, women have achieved a significantly increased visibility within the field of art, craft, design, and the creative industries generally. The number of museum and gallery directors and curators, and consequently, perhaps the number of exhibitions featuring female artists and craft practitioners, has grown and become increasingly embraced and accepted by the art world. With a new fascination in the qualities of fabric and a desire to explore their aesthetic rather than utilitarian potential. The 1960s and 70s revolutionized fiber art, sometimes employing boundary-pushing media and methods. Since the 1980s, influenced by postmodernist ideas, the medium has found an increasingly conceptual voice. Reaffirming handicraft and needlework as permissible art practice, textile processes such as knitting and crocheting started to become employed as both material and subversive feminist tool. So with that, just to show you a little bit of my own work is very much influenced by folk art and by mythology and folk tales and legends, really. You can see if I put my hand through this that its shape is rather tea cozy like. And I've done a whole series of these, which are somewhat autobiographical, and they're entitled divas. So there's several of these divas. The faces they're all done by needle felting techniques. So in my own practice, I use a lot of felt making techniques, largely machine and hand needle felting, but also something that I think is, well, I know actually because I've written a book about it, something that has also got a long history in the US as well. So my work is also done with using rag rug techniques, but in a rather more painterly and sometimes sculptural way. So again, using hand hooking techniques and other tools, but also using an electric tufting gun. And in this part of the studio that you can't see, I use a floor to ceiling rug frame for that. And it always means kind of working actually from back to front, which is a little bit strange, but it works. So as I've said, a lot of my work is driven by sort of children's art and mythology and folk tales and legends. So these are sort of the elements, some of the faces that go into the bigger work. As I said, they're not intended to be beautiful faces. They're kind of androgynous and fairly ugly, really. And elements like these, which are, you can see they're felt making. And these would be the tools of my trade. So I know what you call, in the US, I know you refer to it as burlap and we call it Hessian. So this is the usual backing cloth that I would use for my rag rug pieces, big and small. And as I said, I do create large pieces, which sometimes involve working with large groups of people as well, for public, private, and domestic commissions for their spaces. So that is a typical prodding tool used for rag rug techniques. And that's one of my many hooks. And I guess it probably would be called like an American fine hook, actually. So I guess it might be familiar to some of you. And a lot of my work also involves using recycled fabrics and fibers and yarns and the mixture of all those. So very heavily, my work, what's happened? Sorry about that. I think we had a little blip, technology. Yeah, so really, I'm just trying to emphasize the fact that a lot of my work is also involves recycling and repurposing and reuse. So a lot of this has kind of driven my interest to write about the book. because I'm very interested in matrilineally learned techniques, and I know sort of rag rugging definitely belongs to all of that. And it's led me to kind of investigate other artist practices and other indigenous techniques and materials and processes around the world, really, and how that impacts upon individual women, groups of women, and then on their communities on a wider level, really. So I will, as I said, I'll do a reading from the book, which I hope kind of contextualizes some of that too. And I started the book actually with a quote from Michelle Obama, which I think kind of resonates throughout the book, really. The difference between a broken community and a thriving one is the presence of women who are valued. I'm often conscious of the fact that my main motivation for choosing holiday or travel destinations is not especially influenced by the promise of constant sunshine or by incomparable cuisine, but more often deeply connected to being able to witness local craft practices and cultural traditions. Although frequently regretting not having an additional suitcase to accommodate my magpie habits, I've long delighted in collecting what I consider to be the most aesthetically interesting objects and artifacts, including Yoruba tribal beadwork, Rajasthani textiles, flamboyant Portuguese pottery, Middle Eastern metalwork, and hand-painted Dutch folk art. And of course, that's not all. Creativity is at the very core of being human and is the trait that is at the heart of imaginative and innovative thinking and some of civilization's most significant achievements. Albert Einstein talked about the importance of awakening the joy in creative expression. During my practice as a textile artist over the last 30 years, I've continually witnessed in others both the creatively and socially therapeutic power of facilitated creativity. In many of the workshops I've run, it is thanks to that creative buzz involving busy hands and unleashed imaginations, and a process I've come to regard as the mindfulness of making, that intimate and easy conversations amongst women who were not previously acquainted are so readily enabled. My own practice is somewhat process-driven, as I've shown you, with an interest in the behavior and manipulation of fabric, its construction and transformation, and often utilizing reclaimed and recycled fabrics, threads, objects, and artifacts. Much of the work included in this book is partially a reflection of my long-held interest in folk art, and admittedly, my ability to be constantly seduced by color, pattern, and texture. But in every case, they also exemplify my interest in the skills and making methods of the artists and artisans, and indeed the stories behind the work. Much of it requires outstanding patience and attention to detail and a respect for traditions and methods which have been preserved for generations, often within strong feminocentric cultures, with locally available materials and patterns and motifs commonly informed and influenced by fascinating histories. The maker's hands fashion and tell their stories in their chosen medium. Their distinctiveness and handmade charm, usually accompanied by an intuitive sense of color and form, frequently make the pieces irresistible. It is true that the book features predominantly textile-related crafts, but in so many parts of the world, in their tactility and as a means of communication and expression, textile crafts represents the skill and traditions which, particularly in matrilineal societies, have been passed from generation to generation and woven into their culture. For many of the female enterprises featured, handicraft represents their very means of survival. Within this context, the term empowerment may take on different connotations and definitions, dependent upon the culture, cosmology, history, topography, political and social circumstances surrounding any particular group of women. It is too easy to have both an idealized romantic notion of the issues and also to view situations with Western value systems. For some groups of women, it represents support, social cohesion, companionship, information sharing, perhaps even addressing issues of homelessness or displacement, or the means to escape, at least for a portion of the day, from an oppressive, male-dominated environment. In the recounting and stitching of their stories, for some, it offers the flexibility of being able to combine their traditional craft skills with domestic duties and childcare, whilst being able, for the first time in their lives, to open a bank account and supplement the family income. For others, it offers their first opportunity of gaining continued employment and the freedom from long-held stigma, as is the case in certain Ethiopian communities, where mothers of twins can be tragically outcast from society. Numerous studies and statistics illustrate that by creating economic empowerment, particularly in rural communities, whereby women are able to generate a regular and sustainable source of income, the poverty cycle can effectively be inhibited, ultimately creating a degree of social change. In their ability to be both practical and adaptable, women have consistently proven that they're more able to make family-focused decisions. They create secure households, purchase livestock, and grow fruit and vegetables, providing adequate nutrition, hygiene, healthcare, access to clean water, and educational provisions for their daughters as well as for their sons. All of this, in turn, has a positive impact upon their communities. So, are shackles actually being shed? And if so, to what degree? Quite apart from my sheer admiration of the contents of their creative output, I've continuously asked myself these questions whilst engaging with and seeking answers from the many hugely helpful contributors in this book. Amongst several cultures and societies, in addition to their various domestic tasks, the actual workload for women increases considerably when adding the commercial practice of their craft into the mix. However, at grassroots level, perhaps it is social cohesion, the sense of security derived from the ability to independently earn an income, and not least of all, the preservation, protection, and sometimes development of ancient indigenous techniques, which remain key factors. So beside me, I have a number of objects that I have either included or they reflect some of the visual contents of the book. And about 6 months or so prior to COVID, this is a little pin cushion, but it contains the fabrics of, we went to 2 islands, which are an hour's ferry journey or so from the mainland of Estonia in Europe. And these are 2 islands where the society is it's matrilineal and has been for generations. It's the females absolutely rule the island and make all the decisions, because the men are away at sea most of the time, and if not, they're on building projects. So I'm showing you this little pincushion because you might remember in my reading I said that textile culture is often extremely communicative, and in fact the woven stripes in this are the stripes of the women's skirts, which they weave themselves. So any adult woman would probably possess about 17 skirts in their wardrobes. And the skirts consist of each skirt has a different configuration of colored stripes, which actually communicate her status to the rest of the community. So the stripes, which would be predominantly dark and somber, a lot of black, a lot of dark reds in them, would really denote a state of mourning or misfortune. And conversely, on the other hand, one with predominantly bright colors would denote joyfulness and youth and somebody in happier circumstances. So it's very easy to see as they walk around exactly what their state of being at that time is, almost instead of language, really. On the other side, and in this little bag, these are typical printed fabrics, which are actually imported by them from the US. Every woman, and certainly married women, they would always wear aprons and headscarves of a combination of these fabrics, and their blouses are also made from these sorts of printed cotton fabrics. In the other nearby island, Muhu, this sort of knitwear and the pattern, the motif in the pattern is also very typical. And in fact, now because they use chemical and aniline dyes, although the colors in their knitwear are fantastically bright, beautiful combinations of fuchsia pinks and bright oranges, this is a slightly darker version, but the wool in both the skirts and the knitwear is from their locally bred sheep, spun from those. And it's quite a sort of sturdy, coarse wool. So that's the two islands of Estonia. And I'm sure if anybody has actually already seen the book, that will be a little bit familiar, really. So this is Madhubani papier-mâché, which is made in the state of Bihar in northern India, up near Nepal. So it's made very predominantly by women. And actually, as you can see, the form has a very handmade form, quite crude in its qualities, really. And these would have originally been influenced by the mud creations, which were made for wedding and ritual ceremonies, really. But the actual painted patterns on them, the motifs, are very influenced and are a sort of development from the Madhubani exterior and interior wall paintings, which were done in the area. So they're very much a progression of those. And this is how the actual decoration would be started, with what are called kachni, or the black outlines. And then they're later painted in usually very bright colors. Also on the outside, and decorated in that way. But it is a very lengthy process, the papier-mâché making. So it's, hours and hours of soaking once the paper's been shredded, and then with various resins added to it, including the herb fenugreek, which is actually added to give it some fragrance, but also as a deterrent for insects, which is very, very important, really, in that sort of heat and humidity where they live. So, as I say, they're sort of, I think, beautifully kind of crude objects, and I say that in the most positive sense, really. They always want to maintain the kind of handcrafted look, and you can see from behind, it is so obviously hand done. But over the years, they've really developed the craft, and it is attracting more women to it. And they've found ways of adapting the skills and techniques and speeding up the processes, really, by using things like plaster of Paris molds, and then hand molding on top of that, or also using stainless steel articles to kind of give them that primary mold. So now Madhubani papier-mâché work is really being sold in many parts of the world. This is the work of monkeys in South Africa, in the Cape area, really, of South Africa. And I just want to compare, really, the quality of these fantastically done beaded animals with what I hope not to disparagingly call kind of typical South African from that area beadwork, really street beadwork, which certainly is lovely in its way, but you can very quickly see that it doesn't have the inventiveness and creativity that the work of Monkey Biz has. So in the KwaZulu province, beadwork historically and traditionally has long been a craft, but originally it was more for sort of adornment, you know, clothing and adornment. Oh, it's gone again.
I have no idea what's going on.
Sorry about that. We seem to sort of lose the connection from time to time. So yes, it was more of a sort of two-dimensional craft used for adorning clothing, decoration. But you can see that these are all, they're three-dimensional. And in fact, the beaders for Monkey Biz, it's very much been a thing that their own individual creativity has been encouraged. So really, no two pieces are the same. And some of their best beaders have become extremely well known for their work and highly collectible. They've certainly cottoned on to the marketing aspect of their craft. And this isn't actually a prime example, but there are certainly examples in my book. And they know that sometimes the zaniest, most exaggerated facial features actually sell work very well. So they've done many kind of design shows all over the world. And they've also had very interesting collaborations. For one, sort of about 6 years ago, with the LA-based duo, the Haas brothers, who are designers themselves. And they created a collection called Afriques, which are much bigger pieces by and large, and they're combined with other materials as well as the intricate beadwork with rubber and wood and copper, different metals. And these have been shown also to in shows like Design Indaba in South Africa, and also in Design Miami Basel, which is like one of the best design forums, really. So these have become very visible to collectors, curators, interior designers, architects. Yeah, highly collectible these days. And the work of Karos, also in South Africa. It was started by an artist called Irma van Rooyen, who with her husband decided to move away from Johannesburg. Just put that, whoops, down to the side. They moved from Johannesburg to the Limpopo province to become citrus farmers. And it wasn't long before they realized the seasonal nature there of farming and how that impacted upon people's livelihoods, and particularly women's livelihoods, really. And knowing that embroidery is a long-held tradition there, she started off an initiative and now actually employs beyond 1,300 embroiderers. So these are quite typical motifs, but they create a large range of products within their work. So this is just a small pouch, but they also do, some of their best workers actually create like one-off large monumental wall hanging, pieces, and those are only actually sold through exhibitions. You can see the sort of intricate stitch work here, and there's always that kind of contrast between the running stitch and the filled in areas, which are done with embroidered chain stitch. And then you've got sort of scallop shapes here, which in fact are very reflective of some of the decorations on the outside of their buildings, really. They very commonly have these scallop shapes there. So it's no surprise, I think, that Karos actually gained the prestigious South African Craft Award about 3 years ago. And in fact, they remain one of South Africa's most successful export industries. In a sense, it's a little bit different to show these items because we're not, I would never include them or sort of categorize them as craft exactly, but as a social enterprise initiative and something that involves kind of textile making and recycling. I think they're a wonderful example to write about and to show. It was only started about 3 years ago by a Swiss couple who decided to move to Tel Aviv in Israel. And they make a whole collection of functional bags from what would otherwise have gone to landfill. So they're made from kite surfs and wetsuits and parachutes and army material. And there are 16, I think now, 16 global drop-off points for this kind of recycled material. And very importantly, the people who make these have been given by Kite Pride, they're given safe rehabilitation employment. They're people who had previously been in modern slavery, really. They were forced into prostitution, they were sex trafficked, and they now have safe employment by Kite Pride. And I think it's really a wonderfully successful initiative. And I think the last piece I'm really going to show you is, I hope I will pronounce this correctly, is a bag which in Colombia is known as a mochila. And these are made by the Wayu people in La Guajira in Colombia. The colors now, whereas they would have originally been done with sort of plant materials and much more somber in color, they now use, well, they've replaced really materials like agave and cotton for the crochet work with synthetic materials and also, again, with chemical dyes. So they're a lot brighter, but importantly, they're also quite a lot more resistant from the sun. And La Guajira is a very, very arid, harsh climate, really. Again, rather like certainly when I was talking about Muhu and Kihnu at the beginning, this is a long history of being a very matrilineal society. The women absolutely rule there, and to the extent that girls take their mother's surname, and girls are taught everything by the women in the family. It's not so practiced culturally currently now, but it was the case that from the age of 10, a girl would enter into her aunt's or her grandmother's home and would be taught all the ways and would go through various, actually what we would see as quite severe initiation rites and practices. but they do learn everything from the women in their family, from the women elders, including all their textile traditions. And actually the patterns on these bags are known as kanasu, but they're really expressive of the individual maker. It's that individual maker's dreams and interests and way of life that are expressed through they call it weaving, but it actually is crochet work, and it's done with either a double or single thread and depends on the size, usually quite a fine crochet hook, and always started from the bottom like this. So these would be made to actually carry their tools about with them, or their textile materials as well. But they're now, of course, exported, sold. And of course, it's important we know that there's a degree of cultural appropriation going on, and these are being made elsewhere, the cheaper varieties elsewhere too. So yes, that can be somewhat of a problem, really. It is important to buy from them. And the straps you will see are slightly different. They're woven, sometimes actually woven by the men in society as well. So that pretty much brings me to the end of show. I hope you will read the book. I hope you'll get the book, because there are so many more beautiful photographs and beautiful examples of craft work in there. And I hope you will think that, the stories behind these works are very interesting. It goes far beyond what I've had the time to tell you this evening, really.
Hi again, Lynn.
Hi.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, so I'm going to ask you about this one. I know we were talking about it earlier, and I'm going to try to get a picture
Right.
of it as best I can.
Right.
Can you tell us anything about this?
Yes, sure. So this is the crochet coral wreath, and it was started actually by the concept was by two sisters, Australian, but who I think they both live in LA now. So Margaret Wertheim, who's the main sort of initiator of this, is actually essentially a science writer. And the work really it crosses many issues, really. So it's environmental, because it's addressing the depletion of corals because of the climate crisis. But it's also mathematical and scientific in that it looks at the similarities between the process of crocheting and the stitches and I suppose the way coral is constructed, really. Whoops, we've lost Lynne. There you are. And so, she started with like a project, but this has gone worldwide, really. And there've been several what she calls satellite reefs developed across the world, where communities have got together, again, very predominantly women, and created collaboratively these coral reefs, which have been exhibited also all over the world. And Margaret Wertheim, actually, she's given at least one really impressive TED talk about this, if anybody wants to catch that. Margaret Wertheim, the surname is Wertheim, but it is in my book, so you can definitely look that up further. And the one that I have illustrated there is called the Four Wreath, because it was largely created, based at the Four Museum, which is an island that's just off Germany and off Denmark. And it involved women from Switzerland, Belgium, Luxembourg, Denmark, I think, and Germany. But actually, there were weekly workshops run at the Four Museum. And I think overall, about 700 female participants, all bonding, as I said, over a kind of tea and cake. or coffee and cake. So that's a fabulous example. But I mean, it's certainly several of the wreaths have like particularly looked at issues of, you know, environmental issues as well as the depletion of coral, and at waste and trash, washing up on the beaches, and actually have incorporated things like plastic and waste in the crochet work. So it's really worth looking at more examples of this. They're phenomenal.
Really beautiful too. On top of all of the
Absolutely, it works on so many levels, really.
yeah. One more from me, and forgive me if I sound a little foolish here, but do you have art in this book of your own?
No, that's a good question, really. No, I don't. I have things that I possess in there, but not that I've made. But it's the second book that I've done for Bloomsbury. The first book I did was called, I think, as you might have said, Rag Rug Creation. You did an exploration of color and surface. So that is actually about my own creative practice. And in fact, I'm also currently writing a new edition for Bloomsbury of that. So they're publishing really all three of the books that I've done. And I have, prior to doing Rag Rug Creations, I've contributed to a lot of books about that medium, really.
So the third one, the one you have upcoming, is the second edition of Rag Rug Creations.
It's a new edition, and it's not going to be called, it's actually going to be called Hook, Prod, Punch, Tuft, Creative Ways with Creative Techniques with Fabric and Fiber. So it's actually looking at creating similar surfaces, but using additional tools and techniques, and being more kind of yarn focused than rag focused as well. But this new book will also contain the original material as well. Yeah, so that's due out in early spring 2023.
Okay, so you're writing a lot, you're traveling a lot. When do you do art?
Well, it's a very good question. Well, I mean, I'm making projects for that new book at the moment as well. So it's it's a juggling technique. But I mean, I feel I'm not very happy if I'm not actually making anything. So
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, you are a busy lady, a very
I am.
talented lady, and I love this book. And again, I'm just going to show the cover of that. That's the mug that you showed.
Thank you. And maybe turn it around, because it also shows an element of on the back, as well. So you can sort of see just a little bit more of, And I think there's quite a bit of stuff on social media and sort of looking at the insides, maybe.
Yeah, let's, I mean, I don't know what's on social media, but there's a lot of, these rugs are beautiful.
They are, aren't they? Mainly from the Atlas Mountains in Morocco. And again, very, very much sort of recycling and yes, even again, using things like plastic and sort of acetates. And
I mean, here using rope. I don't know what's going on in that top picture.
Sisal in Kenya, that tells you about the typical basket making that takes place in Kenya.
Huh. Well, this has been very entertaining, eye-opening for me. I enjoyed it immensely, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time to be here now at nearly 10 o'clock your time. I really appreciate that. I hope sometime in the future we are able to touch base in person,
I
but
hope so too.
it would be great. If not, this has sure been a pleasure, and I want to thank you again for being here.
Thank you very much, Lane. Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Good seeing you all again. We will see you maybe tomorrow for our first in-store event. In the meantime, please consider still wearing your mask, and I hope you have a great night. Thanks again to Lynne. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.